I first want to just talk about this conference and happy to have you all here. I think on some of the invites, I talked about how folks call it a little bit of an unconference. It's not, we have some great presentations, but we also expect participation. And so this is a chance for industry and leaders within the space, industrial base, to be heard and to really go through with us, what's the current state of the space industrial base? We sort of divide it up into topics and what are the challenges? But then most of all, we really need to hear where you all think the recommendations for moving forward are. So we'll really, pick your brains. The way it works is we usually have, a few presentations, and then we have working groups, separate concurrent working groups, and you'll see those sessions on the agenda. And with that, the leaders will move you all through getting to that current state, what the challenges, what are the recommendations. But this year, we're also going to add a little something called co-innovation sessions. And what we found last year, for me, especially leading the workforce, STEM and education working group, a lot of folks were in the different working groups, but wanted to be in that workforce. So what we're going to do with these co-innovation sessions is we're going to try and do like a little mini working group topic where you'll see some of the leaders will set the stage. We'll have some surveys and where you all participate in those topic areas. So you'll see that coming up. We have one on the supply chain, one co-innovation session on the workforce, STEM and education, also regulatory challenges with novel technologies. So we have those co-innovation sessions. And then another thing we do is we set up some partner workshops. We work with Space Florida and have a partner workshop on commercial space launch. We have a partnership with Space Northwest, and so there's a couple topics there with advanced space power and propulsion, as well as hybrid space architecture, which we're now calling the Outer Net, and you'll hear from that. And then also probably a partner workshop on international partnerships. So here at the main conference, we're going to do a co-innovation session for each of those 4 topics. So there'll be 7 of those. So get your phones out or whatever, and you'll be able to give inputs with that. One of the key things that, NewSpace Nexus hosts this conference and helps run those partner workshops with our partners. But a key part of the success of this is we work with key government partners that really want to hear your voice. And so we work with Defense Innovation Unit, and I know General Stephen, there you are, Stephen Bucky, as we all know him and love him. Bucky Buteau is one of the key partners. We work with Air Force Research Lab, and we have Colonel Raley here is a key partner. And with the Space Force, we have this year Colonel Kniseley with the COMSO office is standing up to be a key partner, as well as the Innovation Prototyping Directorate here at Kirtland with Colonel Roth. So we're excited to have that. And just a little bit about NewSpace Nexus. We're a nonprofit. We're here to help accelerate the pace of innovation for our space companies. They're our main customer. And what we say is we unite and ignite space. We try and bring everybody together to work together, but we also ignite by providing resources. And you'll get to see some of those resources if you go to our dinner at the launch pad, which is pretty close to here this afternoon or this evening. And we have a partnership intermediary with Air Force Research Lab that helps fund some of those programs that help the companies. And hopefully, if any of you were here yesterday, you got to see some gems from our NewSpace Igniter program. Those are the smaller companies that we help them, like you said, get from their concept to product to sales. And we're really excited. We've had that program in place in partnership with AFRL for a year and a half, and we're tracking, I think it's 40 or it might be 42, and actually hearing from the companies yesterday, I think it went up, but 42 million in wins between government contracts, investments, and strategic partners with some of the big companies. So we're really making a difference for these new space companies. And we work basically like with the NewSpace Igniter, we work at the company level, but we also work at the industry level by putting on conferences such as the State of the Space Industrial Base, where we really want to make sure we inform the full industrial base from all over the nation on, you know, what are the things we need to go forward and stay a leader for our nation. So with that, I wanted to first of all introduce our team. If any of our team could just stand up and wave, you're going to meet them through the week. Come on, stand up. See, let's see. There's Ariel's running this. Yes. So I won't go through all their names right now, but hopefully you'll meet them through. Yesterday we're all wearing our Nexus t-shirts, and if you are good to us, we'll give you one of those, I think, right? Anyways, you'll see. I'm really excited for you all to go to the dinner tonight to see one of our the facility where some of our small companies come and work, and you get to see a little more about us than just running these awesome conferences. But I wanted to also say we added a new teammate because we're really trying again to inform the space industrial base, and I want to do a quick introduction to Scott Sadler. So for those of you, many of you in the space community probably already received the emails from Scott Sadler, but we just, NewSpace Nexus has a pretty large distribution as well, so we added our distribution to it. So you're getting all these emails, and a lot of the local folks were like, who is this guy? And it's like, you need to see there's so much more behind, you know, your local Space Force organizations. And what I love about his emails, it informs you what's going on with Congress. And for me, I've always been about, if you want to figure something out, you need to follow the money. And so it's really great because he follows the money with Congress. But I'll let him, he's been a leader to many DoD advisors, and I was excited to hear from his bio. He actually helped the first CSO of Space Force get Senate, whatever, the Senate.
There's too many.
I'm from New Mexico. I can't remember that Senate thing.
There's too many acronyms, Casey. You know, she's referenced in the first Senate confirmed ASAP for space acquisition.
Yeah, I'll let him say
and integration, Frank Calvelli. But if you all are not a part of this distro list, please feel free to see me. If you're a company out there, you know, we're going to eventually look to potential sponsorships of this, and we'd love to highlight your logo and some of the important messages that you're trying to stress to the people that are actually reading these emails. And believe me, you know, folks like Diane and Chirac in the White House, to the space advisor at the National Security Council, to key staff members on the Hill, they will all see the messages that you're trying to stress. I am just so excited to have, you know, partnered with NewSpace Nexus, because I think this list, this distro list, and the messages that it has sent across the national security space community is so vital to helping everyone understand the intersections of Congress, industry, and the like. So I've really enjoyed it, and thank you so much, Casey.
Yeah, so.
Thank you.
And so if you know us, we name everything NewSpace something or other, right? So, you know, our company is NewSpace Nexus, but we like our Igniter program. I always tell the team, quit calling it just Igniter. It's the NewSpace Igniter, because we love our little NewSpace logo with the, you know, the rocket going through the W. So, so it's now the NewSpace Sadler Report. Anyways, so there's so much more, and I hope you all learn all the great things that our little organization, we say we're small and mighty, but we're doing some great things, and we're just like I say, all about the space industrial base and anything um, to help keep it strong, to help the individual companies be strong. And so anyways, thank you for coming and welcome to the Young Conference. Make sure you participate because we need to hear from you. With that, I'm excited to introduce one of our key partners from Air Force Research Lab, Colonel Jeremy Raley. He's a commander of the Phillips Research Site, which entails the two directorates here at AFRL, the Space Vehicles Directorate and the Directed Energy Directorate. And so he's the director, but then also the commander of the full site. He leads a team of over 1,000 military, civilian, and on-site contractors who comprise the nation's center of excellence for military space science and technology. He previously was at the tech director at the Space Rapid Capabilities Office. So if you catch him, he knows a little bit about that as well. But we're really happy to have Colonel Raley here, and welcome, sir.
All right, good morning. And before it gets out, I was the acting tech director over there at Space RCO as a second job. I was a senior material leader for one of our ambiguously named groups over there. So I don't want Dr. Dalrymple or somebody to think I'm trying to usurp. I did use that to meddle quite a bit because there was just so much fun stuff going on in both portfolios. So it was great to be able to reach across like that. Being the first speaker for this, I kind of looked at, okay, what are we trying to do? And at this conference, the one where we all come together here in Albuquerque, it seemed like everything. And I knew I can't cover everything. And so my goal is really just to kind of set the tone and provide some context and some updates behind what's going on and some of the things that you can keep in mind as an overarching framework for as you're having these side meetings, as you're getting to do the enviable work of digging into the technical and programmatic details that actually make all these things churn through. These should be some guiding principles that will help you understand, like, okay, hey, what are we actually trying to get after here from AFRL's viewpoint anyway. Obviously, you'll have others that will go slightly differently on this. And so I think the number one thing is partnership. And so this room is, I don't know, I'm not going to spend time on this because if you're in this room, you already understand the value of partnership. You already understand the value of showing up face to face. You already understand the value of figuring out where it's good to cooperate and where it's good to compete with others in the room. And both of those aspects, cooperation and competition, help strengthen the ecosystem behind space innovation that we're trying to create here. There's a lot of opportunity for partnership. I mean, the acronym PIA, the P is for partnership. And so I'm not going to foot stomp that anymore because, again, like I said, you've demonstrated by your actions that you already understand the value of that. And so I'll hit it a few other times in what I talk about this morning. But, the number one thing is while you're here, if you have a question, hey, should I talk to one more person? Should I bring somebody that's not currently in my circle into my circle? Those kinds of things. The answer is yes. Do that while you're here. Take advantage of the opportunity, please. The next thing I wanted to talk about is the role of AFRL, space vehicles, Phillips Research Site, AFRL as an enterprise. And if I talk out of turn, I see partners from other directorates in here that can come and correct me a little bit. But I want to just talk about, as you interact, especially with space vehicles, what are the things that we're trying to do? What are we trying to get after? And so as I'm getting ready to wrap up my second year in the seat as the director of space vehicles, I guess it was really early this year. I do an offsite with my division chiefs and direct reports and some of the more senior leaders there in RV. And I started, kind of trying to distill down what is it that we're doing here. And I realized the product that we put out isn't a satellite that's flying in space. That's a byproduct of what we're doing. But the reason it's there is because we're trying to answer questions. And that's hard, right? When they're like, what's your product? It's like, well, it's the answer to a question. And it's not as hard if the answer is always supposed to be yes, but sometimes with us, the answer is supposed to be no, try again. You didn't quite have it right. How would we tweak that? Is this a good idea for something we're going to invest more in? And so that kind of brings out what I see as that second role. And the thing that I really want to double down on right now, which is informing our future force designs. That's where that return on investment from answering questions actually comes back. That's where you can actually see a payoff. And again, it's easy to see the payoff when it's hey, we matured this technology and therefore it was mature. And so when we went to incorporate it in a future system, a future constellation of satellites, or whatever it was cheap for us to do that because we didn't get stuck in tech development land while we were doing an acquisition. And Mr. Calvelli has, kind of doubled down on that a few times of like, hey, let's not carry things that are, high risk technical maturations or technical developments into an acquisition activity with us. But it's a little bit more than informing that. Again, what we have to do as the lab is sometimes have the moral courage to go, I don't think this is going to work out. There's a recent example. I'm actually going to talk about some of the specifics later, but there's a recent example where we had to do that. And, the answer came up. The answer that we ended up settling on with the Space Warfighting Analysis Center was physically possible, but not advisable to do something that we wanted to do. And I think that was really valuable. And the problem is it hurts the team's morale because everybody on in my organization, they want to get to a yes, they want to get to a win, they want to get to a patent, a never before done. And sometimes I do not overemphasize. I mean, I have a lot of numbers on various officer performance reports of mine that are suspect, but I'm not overemphasizing that we probably saved over $1 billion by not taking a faulty assumption into an acquisition where once Congress appropriates money into specific program elements, and that's the thing you need to buy, that's the thing you're going to buy whether it works or not. And that's the thing you're going to buy no matter how long it takes and how much, you end up having to add to it. And so we're trying to avoid that right now. In what we put forward. The third role I want to talk about is maturing technology. So I just gave two examples of where it's like, maybe we don't, maybe sometimes we have to say no on the maturing technology, but I do not want to abandon or give any sense that that's not still a primary function in the lab. But I do want to put a nuance on that. As we inform those force designs, what I would like to be able to say as we mature technology is, here's a mission we want to do. Here's where we fall short of being able to close that mission. Or here's several areas that we could explore that would allow us to close that mission. And now here are the technologies, here are one or more technologies that we should mature so that we can go and perform that mission. And so that's a little bit more directed and a little bit less exploratory than we sometimes do it. Again, I'll talk at the end. There's still plenty of exploratory out there, but again, it gives us that sense of, why are you doing this? What is the purpose behind it? What is the end goal when we're maturing that technology? And it also gives us a place to know, hey, are we on a glide path to close this? Or are we going to be maturing this technology for so long that an adversary is going to get ahead of us on something? When do we know to revert to the brute force method of getting something done? And what are we doing there? And then, of course, the last thing that we do in the lab, I keep saying what we're not doing, and then the next thing I say is that we're doing that thing. So the last thing we do, though, is to push the new, to do that technology push, and to help us avoid technical surprise. I realize that's probably stolen from DARPA because they say that, but then I look at my portfolio and I have a number of partnerships with DARPA, so I feel like it's fair game. That's part of what we're trying to do, and that comes down to hey, here's a new idea. If our adversaries had this idea, what could they do with it? Let's explore that. If they have it and we don't, what disadvantage does that leave us at? And if we have it and they don't, what advantage could that provide us? And where does that allow us to save things in the future? The key with the new technology pushes for, at least for the time being, until such time as somebody decides they're going to double our budgets and do all sorts of crazy things that I don't see happening soon. The key with those is that it can't just be another add-on to, hey, we have all these tools and now there's another tool in the toolbox. We have to actually look at the drawer and go, okay, what tool are we going to remove from the toolbox because there's a maintenance cost associated with that in order to put this new thing in there, and how much more effective is that going to make us? And to loop all that back around, to what I talked about, that's answering the question of how much more effective is that going to make us, and it's informing the future force design with some quantitative information, so that it's not just a bunch of people that have been in the space business a long time, like many of the people in this room, sitting down and going like, okay, I feel like that, let's debate each other, and then whoever has the most eloquent position can win. I'd really like to be able to put some quantitative information behind that, and not only just to make the arguments more fair, or maybe even, I don't know if more logical is the right word, but I'll use it anyway. Not only to do that, but also to let us know, are we closing on what we said we were going to do, or do we need to, rub our eyes, take a step back, and consider something again as we do that? So that's what I wanted to get to with the role of the labs. If you're thinking you want to interface with the labs, you should be able to put what you're going to do, the value that you're going to bring to the lab, if we're going to have a contract with you or something, into one of those 4 categories, and or a combination or hybrid of more than one also. The next thing I wanted to talk about was some of the trends that I see with our interaction with industry right now. And so I never ever, I don't think I've ever in my life used a pulpit like this to go and beat on industry and say, you need to do this better for us, this needs to happen better, or something like that. So everything I say up here should be viewed through the lens of how do we interact more effectively. Not I'm trying to blame anything. I'm not trying to take all the blame. I'm not trying to put blame. But I do want to talk about how we interact a little bit more effectively given some of the conditions we have. And the first condition that we have in the research and development game is unknowns at program definition. That's really disruptive to a program. And for the lab, it's almost laughable, right? Because some of our acquisition superiors come down to us and go like, you need to do firm fixed price on this thing. It's like, on what thing? Well, I mean, you know what you want, right? And it's like, I have an idea now, but what I want, reference my earlier point, is to answer some questions. And if I have questions, that means I cannot define everything, 100% to the level of detail that I need. That puts risk on the government when we say, hey, we're going to be liable. We're going to use, maybe a cost type vehicle or something to put some of that risk on us. It puts risk on industry, because industry says, who are the people that we're going to put against this? What is the time we're going to dedicate to it? What are the resources, the physical plant that we have that's going to be tied up with doing this for that certain period of time? And we can end up at cross purposes if we haven't A, defined what some of those unknowns are, and B, defined how we are going to how we're going to resolve those unknowns and how we're going to talk about those. And so one of the things that I see, and I see it from the government side as well, is we would rather kind of pretend the problem doesn't exist until it comes to a head sometimes. And so what I want to encourage is a little bit more communication around, hey, these are the areas where we're going to have unknowns, not only at contract inception, but like as things are executing. Sometimes I've seen some no news, good news, And so on the government side, we'll be like, oh yeah, industry must have it under control because they haven't called and asked for more money yet. And industry will say, yeah, the government must be cool with the requirements that we set, 18 months ago because they haven't called and said that something's going to change yet. And on the government side, I don't have insight into the industry side. We're sitting there going like, oh no, okay, so that launch we promised or that GFE we promised is now at risk, or we have some other, there's some other political pressure to make sure it integrates with this system that we didn't even know was going to exist at the time. We were out there doing discussions with industry and solicitations and those sorts of things. So that's the reason I put it out there is because I don't have an answer, and the format of this venue is like the best minds getting together to talk about these things. So please help me understand how we can do a better job at defining those unknowns, or not even defining the unknowns because they wouldn't be unknowns, but at defining how we're going to deal with unknowns that we expect to arise, even while we're still defining the program. Yeah, and that kind of drives the second one, which is that need for tailored acquisition management. A lot of the research and development functions are just not well suited to either the types of contract vehicles that are out there, to commercial services, to all those things that are kind of the hot buzzwords and the things that we're trying to drive for our longer term stable acquisitions. And so figuring out ways that we can communicate better to have those discussions around tailored acquisition, not only for the solicitation and the award and the instrument, but as we go through managing, I think is going to be helpful for us. And then the last one that I wanted to hit was the integration surprises that end up threatening programs. And this goes back again to a lot of those unknowns of, hey, when we go to put all this together, is it really going to work in the manner that we expected? And what are the things that are on both sides? Have we allocated the risk correctly? Do we have off ramps? Because by the time you get to integration, it's like everybody in AFRL is sick of hearing about our program at that point. So it's really hard to go get people excited again and ask for more money to put things together. And so a lot of times we have to figure out, okay, what's our option to do what we can with the resources that we have, versus being able to plus something up. And then the last thing I wanted to hit on in trends is some of the harm that is done by congressional interest items and program directive memorandums. It always seems cool to like watch money wash into your program. But when I look at what that does to financial execution for the lab, especially sometimes at the scope and scale that we have, that money generally does not show up until the very end of the fiscal year in which it was allocated. And that's if we only have a half year of CR. And so it puts us in a position where it's very difficult to integrate. It harms us for that future, for the following year, because we start that year with money not executed on our books because a lot of, it often gets added to our program element, and so forth. And so, as I talk to industry who is 100% able and competent at going and talking to your congressional representatives and understanding, what it is you bring, I would say just be careful and judicious, and let's define those things really well so that it doesn't end up coming back on us as an inflexibility to execution that locks us into something, so that when you come with your next good idea, it's like, yeah, sorry, our foot is caught in the bear trap of your last good idea for another, 26 months. And then when we finish that, we'll be able to talk about this stuff. That doesn't allow us to innovate at the pace that we would like to sometimes. So there's just a level of cooperation with the service, I think, that could be improved there. All right. Yeah. So, all right. So that's all the, kind of fun stuff to cage your thinking. But I think it's also informative to talk about, what do I consider a success? What do we in RV take credit for as some of our past successes? And so because I've talked to not this exact group, but members of this group about some of these things probably about a year ago. I wanted to give a little update on some of the things that fell into our flight experiment category. And so one of those was IRIS, where the Space Warfighting Analysis Center had an assumption that said, hey, we think we're going to be able to talk to legacy MUOS terminals from LEO. And I was like, cool, sounds like an engineering challenge, but something we can overcome. And so we designated a team to go do that. It's also one of those things that's like, just because you assume you can do it doesn't mean you have it well characterized. What slant angles can you get to? What's the handoff look like? And all those things. And as we started digging into some of the protocols that existed there, we realized that's the one I was talking about before, physically possible, not advisable as far as what it would drive in the technical solution. It would drive a level of complexity that nobody wanted to take on at the beginning. And so because of that, we were able to adjust those assumptions before we got into an acquisition to buy literally billions of dollars worth of next generation narrowband satellite communication type of equipment. The other one that I wanted to talk about as far as a flight experiment from last year was Chameleon. This is where we were looking to drive down the cost of the overall system cost of surveillance, tracking, and reconnaissance assets that we could put in space. Trading high resolution and things that are more exquisite for temporal resolution of how can we get these things more often and how can we drive down the system cost and the procurement time. And so that's folks looking at computational imaging and some novel glass that they're putting in place in order to get there. And that was showing some promise because it was first let's study this, let's look at it in the lab and make sure it's going to be possible before we start committing to, hey, we're going to actually go build a whole spacecraft to go do some of these kinds of things. And then the last one, is kind of a success on multiple levels, and that is the directed energy protection for our satellites on orbit. And really what that's about is I realized I have all these programs where I'm looking at on-orbit servicing, refueling, and all these things. And I have the things that they might go refuel and service have very expensive, very exquisite sensors on there. And so as I come up and do, active ranging, because I certainly don't want to crash into them. So as I come up and do fun things like active ranging, I also don't want to accidentally, poke somebody's eye out or, disable a star tracker or things like that. And then the other thing I looked at is that the Materials and Manufacturing Directorate of AFRL had basically been doing programs like this for pilots and for aircraft for years. And so it was like, the first question we ought to answer is, does the stuff that's basically, cellophane tape kind of things, how will that survive in space? And what is kind of that lowest cost way to add that onto, and the fact that they had done a lot of that work. So it's not a success yet from a technical, hey, have we exposed this stuff and characterized it? But that's actually a fairly simple experiment. But it's a huge success from, you have the Space Vehicles Directorate working with materials and manufacturing. And then there's like a monetary success because they actually went and got Air Force RDT&E money to spend on that instead of having to go allocate our precious Space Force RDT&E money against that. So that transition from air side to space side has been huge. So that's kind of, those are the types of things that I consider success from the last year. Many other successes, over the longer term that I'm sure we'll be talking about as well. But Casey didn't tell me to come give a rah-rah speech for AFRL, even though I would have loved to do that. So we'll move on. So I want to talk about some of the upcoming opportunities that I see out there for industry as well. And one of those, I just talked about, some of our flight experiments from last year. We are right now in the process of doing our next flight experiments call. And so I would encourage industry to reach out to your partners inside the lab, not just in RV, but across the entire AFRL enterprise, because it is in fact an enterprise-wide call, and talk about and see who's looking at putting in an idea for a spaceflight experiment? And are there ways that you want to shape that? Are there unknowns they should know about? You know, back to the beginning of my talk, are there unknowns that they should know about that we should go explore? What are the questions we can answer? How will this inform future force designs and all those sorts of things? Any of that I think can help both sides very much. This is also the time for small businesses to engage, because it's heartbreaking to me when a small business comes and says, we have done this excellent work under a SSIB and we've got it done. And you know, and I look at it and I'm like, that is so cool. Your timing is just off cycle. So can you go on overhead for 9 months while we wait for the, for the money to come through and so forth? And, and they're like, okay, I'm going to call my, business development guys and use the word pivot, or yeah, we'll try to do that. And they hold on to the intellectual property, but the people who knew about it necessarily have to go find other work and so forth. So if you're a small business with an idea, regardless of where you're at in a SSIB or any of that stuff, this is the time to engage with those folks from AFRL, again, from RV or other directorates who might have ideas to push into our spaceflight experiments call. Because even if the answer is, hey, it's not ready right now, but if it's ready at this point and it's part of that experiment, that will give us an on-ramp to go, A, prove out that the technology worked even to a greater degree of credibility, and then B, potentially have a transition for continuing the work on the technology before we get to the end of a SSIB phase 1 and people are running around, with letters and pens going, will you sign my TAC-PI? Will you sign my STRAT-PI? And it's all, done at the end. I know that's not actually, that has literally happened before, so I retract my comment. It's our time to be deliberate about that. And while we're talking through that, this is also the time for the larger primes that are represented in here who have those mentoring relationships with some of the smaller businesses to talk through some of these things and go, hey, is that something that you could kind of lead for our partnership to make that happen? This is the time this is a great time to leverage the partnership intermediary agreements that we have. Obviously, NewSpace Nexus, we got to hear plenty about them this morning. We also have one with CNM. I see the leads of our outreach branch, Gabe and Sarah, sitting in the back there. So talk to them about different ways to do that. I see several people in here who have small business consultancies where they help go, yes, you've got a great idea. I worked for the government for a number of years. Let me help you package that in a way where you're exhibiting that value so that when you get that limited time, when we're in that pre-solicitation period, if you're coming to talk to researchers about it, that you maximize your value there. And so none of that is intended as government endorsement or anything like that. I'm just saying those are some of the ways that we can start to leverage, that high level, that efficient innovation that tends to happen in some of our small business partners there. And I already mentioned that it's an enterprise-wide call, but I'll say it again. This isn't just going to be from RV. Last year, I talked about the successful call from RX. Act 3, the Artificial Intelligence Office, had some work that they're pressing forward with that may go forward. RD, especially on the space domain awareness side. RQ with the propulsion side. I see folks here from there. So yeah, please don't just talk to don't think that's limited to RV, and anything that brings those together. And a lot of times businesses help the government integrate things that we didn't know we should have been bringing together. So feel free to add value in that manner. I'll be slightly embarrassed for a minute and then be like, yeah, this is totally good. So there's that. The next upcoming opportunity is adding value to existing experiments. And so this is the one that is not immediately profitable, I'll say. This is where, hey, we're going to have, for example, NTS-3 in the sky, putting down novel navigation signals, and we are willing to share what signals are going to be radiated at what times with our business partners, so that if you want to do IRAD, if you want to put an L-band antenna on your roof and have some of your smart people look at that and go like, oh, hey, this is what we noticed. This could be a vulnerability, or this could be an opportunity, or so forth, where you could gain a competitive advantage for your future offerings based on being part of that. And then, of course, if we end up with time, which I don't see my principal investigator in here, so I'm not going to have to duck a shoe. But if we end up with extra time where the vehicle lives longer than we expected, which several have, I think Eagle's still alive, I heard the other day. And so if the vehicle lives longer, if people are doing other things, what are the things that we might want it to do that would help people? And so those CRADA type arrangements or handshake arrangements where we just tell you, hey, this is what's going to be happening at certain times. I view that as an opportunity there as well. And then the last thing I wanted to hit on was my director's intent. I did publish that to my directorate last month. And so, some of our folks in industry have probably heard some of the rumblings behind that. I usually make sure that I have a distro A copy that I can just, hand out to people. I don't have that yet. It usually comes a little bit later just because it takes some time to put that together. But I did want to kind of hit on some of the major themes in there. And I'm going to do it chronologically. So one of those is the near-term innovation. And I said, hey, probably 20% of our effort is dedicated to that. And those are the things where it's like, we have a situation that may come up in a wartime event. How can we make those work together? Are there things we can do to utilize the products we have in a manner inconsistent with their labeling that will yield a warfighting advantage? And so those opportunities a lot of times are more directly with the operators, but a lot of times they also look to the lab to either kind of help them. They'll have the idea in their brain, but they look to us to help them flesh it out, to help them test it out so that it can be yea, verily, this is a procedure that you may go do with X number of dollars worth of U.S. assets. And so there are those kinds of things as well. And so partnership with the lab, and then a lot of times if that's a direct industry to operator, they do ask the lab to kind of look at that and go like, okay, hey, what questions should we be asking, and or help us convince our bosses that this is a good idea with a bunch of science words, which we love to do. So, and then the majority of our effort is really going to be in that midterm. I think I ascribed a number of 60%, but we're not doing in down to the decimal point sort of quantitative analysis there. But what we are looking for next generation, and that's kind of end of this decade, beginning of the next decade sort of timeframes. And the reason that most of our effort is concentrated there is because that's where we will actually get to affect that next generation of acquisition. And so going back to what I talked before about what are the questions that we're answering, the questions that we answer today don't help somebody. If I call up some PM and go, well, you should have done it this way, while their contractor is like literally integrating something minimally helpful, usually doesn't even help the relationship. So in fact, just try going home and telling your kids, I told you so. They love it, right? And so, we're looking for, hey, how do we inform things predictively on that? And some of the emphasis areas that we've been getting pushed for from the operations side is, how do I inform a complete system? So in other words, when I have this technology and I'm like, yes, we need to implement this technology because if we do implement it, we'll gain an advantage. If we don't implement it and our adversaries do, we'll be at a disadvantage and so forth. All those things I said at the beginning. What are all the things I bring around that to make that a complete system? Is there a system existing that I can add this to that will be, that will allow it to be deployed in a more efficient manner and so forth? So how do I really, go to system completion? And for me, as the technology side, as the research and development side of things, it is very difficult to do that. It's tempting to not do that, because when I start talking about the complete system required to do that, I have to get really honest about large dollar figures that go and do that. And then people misconstrue and go like, oh, we're going to spend $2 billion, doing this. And it's like, well, no, it'll be a $2 billion infrastructure that will replace a $4 billion infrastructure in the future, or yield that much more value and so forth. But at least internally, we have to be talking through those complete systems and be honest with one another about what it's gonna take to get there, so that again, we don't end up with that R&D success that either doesn't go anywhere or sits there and cools and ossifies and becomes old technology while we're drumming up the fiscal support to get it done. Then the next thing about that midterm is that we are transitioning, and these are words directly from the Chief of Space Operation. We are transitioning from a culture of an Air Force Space Command where we provided services to the Air Force and to a lesser degree the other services to a Space Force where we dominate the domain. And so that space dominance, not just services, has to be what we think about there. And so everything we have should have a question of, hey, does this just make some soldier, sailor, airman, Marines job easier? Or does this allow us to own our domain? Now, sometimes we own our domain in spectrum, and that means we can communicate, and that means those, soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines, and Coast Guard, and whoever else can do their job more easily. But it has to be, let's view things through the context of how does this allow us to dominate in the space domain. And then the last part of that midterm is transition. Obviously, that's the name of the game. When you develop technology, you don't want to do it and then go get an R&D trophy somewhere and shake and take, and then that technology sits on the shelf and you never really hear about it in there. And so, but it is difficult, right? Because at the beginning you're starting and you're all in behind the technology. And so understanding some of the branches and sequels, again, this goes back to our JOB is answering questions. And some of those first questions are, okay, is this anything? Yes, it looks like it's something. Okay, is it applicable to X or to Y? Okay, it's, more applicable to X, but somewhat applicable to Y. How do we put those in there? Even as we have to, in the research and development, we also can't just show up and go like, you know what? These are some good people, and I'm just going to throw money at them, and we're going to go explore together. It's not a grants program that gets us to some of these larger military systems that are going to be more applicable going forward. And so it's how do I lay out those branches and sequels? How do I define those unknowns earlier in the program? And then how do I take credit for what I've learned, even if sometimes the answer was no on what I thought it was going to be? And it's a little bit of calling your shots on I'm going to get to this point and the answer might be no. And that'll be a success because we will have learned that. And here's how much time and effort we'll save by not continuously just getting excited about that, doing a congressional ad on it, and then, or a SIBR, and then letting that die, and then, moving on. I'm just trying to reduce the chaos and the random Brownian motion of research slightly in there. And then the other part of that transition piece is the interface with the major acquisition organizations and understanding where are our on-ramps into getting something done. The last piece is the FAR term, and that's that 20% out. That I would characterize as the high risk, high payoff sorts of things. Those are way more palatable too if there's a couple $100K experiment that can be done that kind of lets us start to answer those questions. So again, this really goes into hey, I'm going to answer question A. I'm going to make a flow chart of how I get through these things. The hard part on this one, the challenge for me is knowing when to simmer that research, when to put it on the back burner, let others continue to develop, let it continue to develop at a lower level, and then come back to it and go, okay, hey, how are we going to transition that in? And so it's very hard to quantify with these things that are 15 years out, give or take. It's really difficult to do that sometimes. So understanding when to simmer that research, and again, having those honest conversations of, hey, are we going anywhere with this, or do we need someone else to do this? Do we need to give it some time for different supporting technologies to develop, or even for a different underlying technology to develop? And how do we say that the answer was no? Because in these FAR terms, it can be really clear when the answer is yes. The difficulty is knowing when the answer is no, not quite. And so how do we do that without completely shutting the door? Because nobody knows that the answer is 100% for sure no. It's well, we're lacking these certain things. So how do we document, define that, and turn those over to others who may want to continue working on those things? And then also in that category, I put the always good efforts. You know, I have a pervasives group in RV where, you know, they're like, hey, why are they doing, you know, what they're doing? I'm like, well, because nobody ever complains about being able to thermoregulate their satellite too well, or having too much electricity available, or being able to deploy too complex of a structure, you know, in a known configuration and things like that. So all these always good efforts, it's looking to that end, and then starting to define some of those points. When I talked about in the force analysis, like, hey, if we were where we find those points of sensitivity where it's like, hey, if we were this good, we could go do this mission. Well, these are the ones where it's like, hey, when this gets to this good, we're not going to quit. But, you know, if we have this much electricity available from solar cells that fit within the fairing of a small or medium launch vehicle, then that's going to allow us to do this mission. That gives us some targets to aim for and some of those transition points to hand those off so we can continue claiming success while we continue also down the road of constant improvement on some of those pervasive technologies. And with that, one of the things I love about this group is that, you know, it's small enough that there's time and space for some dialogue. So I think I have about 5 minutes left where, you know, I'd love to hear if there's a few things on people's minds or something that I didn't address, or a question about something that I said this morning. Thank you. Oh, we are. I thought I had told you I went.
Will you be here this week?
Yes, I will be here for about the next hour and then most of the day tomorrow. And I know some people have been trying to get in touch with my exec, but he got a flat tire on the way to the airport, on the way back from leave, and then delayed by weather and blah, blah, blah. So we'll make it happen, or just, you know, I'll try to make myself available to grab for a sidebar as well.
I can take one question.
Okay.
John Quinn. Hello, 1, 2. Yeah, John Quinn, Exos Aerospace. You asked the question, and love to follow up on it. You know, how can we help define the unknowns? And sometimes what I see is the small business comes up with what the unknowns are, and we can break it up into really little pieces to kind of de-risk it and do iterations, right? Get to this point, small amount of money, go to this point, larger amount. And it seems we get caught, at least we did, where we work with Lockheed Martin in a mentor protege type of arrangement, and our $10 million program becomes a $50 million program that's then presented. And we almost need that because we've got to go to a production environment at some point for it to really be good for defense. So yeah, we need that. But I see it pushing early to get to that stage instead of later. So maybe more iteration with the small companies before we transition to that as kind of a possibility to help that.
Yeah, yes, that's a very good point. And that is actually the trap where we get caught, is what is the correct time to go do that. So when I talked about the spaceflight experiments opportunities this morning, where there's an opportunity for those small businesses to go direct to government and go, hey, is this maturing? Then that's that opportunity to do that before we put it into a major acquisition. You need that major prime mentor in order to go into that major acquisition where you're going to be supplying a whole constellation, and you have to have all the cost accounting standards and all the things that the government puts on us when we go to spend $1 billion. The problem with breaking it up into a bunch of sequential steps is the other piece of what I described, of you get to one of those steps and they go, oh, well, we didn't count on that succeeding, so let us wait 1.5 years till the next fiscal year's money drops, that, you know, where we could palm for that, and then we'll add it in. And so what I'm trying to define with those flight experiments is that in-between place where it's still with the government. If you break it up into infinite steps, you end up facing Zeno's paradox, where you always get halfway there and never actually finish the race. And that slows us down, and that's not conducive to great power competition. So that's why it's a discussion, and it is a very good matter for some of the smart sub-teams that are going to be discussing, how we do acquisition better in the future, to put that together and to put some rubric in place for how we apply that on a case-by-case basis to various technologies. And that was a very fancy way of saying, I'm not quite sure, but I think we can get there. Thank you.
Thank you, Colonel Raley, and thank you for being one of our key partners to welcome the conference. I'm really excited about our next speaker that I told Dr. Diane Howard, third time's a charm. I've been trying to get her to the SSIB, and we made it this year. Dr. Diane Howard currently serves as the Director of Commercial Space Policy at the National Space Council in the Executive Office of the President. The National Space Council is a White House Policy Council chaired by Vice President Harris, and that advises and assists the President on the development and implementation of space policy and strategy. Dr. Howard previously served as Chief Counsel for Space Commerce in the U.S. Department of Commerce, Office of the General Counsel, and as I always like to say, so then she knows commerce for all you folks that want to know more. She's an experienced attorney in the space sector, skilled in space law, legal writing, international relations, and corporate law. And she's a proud member of the International Institute of Space Law, the International Academy of Astronautics, the International Association for the Advancement of Space Safety, and the Explorers Club. So please welcome Dr. Diane Howard.
Oh, thank you. You're going to hear some echoes from Colonel Raley's talk. So it just kind of goes to show that there's really great minds do think alike. So thanks a lot for that warm welcome and also for continuing to invite National Space Council to participate in what we consider to be really important work. And it's more important because you do convene regularly and there's some value to that. And you also do include so many diverse stakeholders. So actually, Casey did just tell you a little bit about National Space Council, who we are, what we do, how we do it. So yes, here in the US, the Vice President chairs the National Space Council, and it's made up of the primary providers of US space capabilities, the Department of Defense, the intelligence community, NASA, NOAA, also the space regulators like commerce and transportation. And it also includes a number of key users of space, such as the Department of Agriculture, the Climate Advisor, and also enablers of our workforce like labor and education. So our team does support Vice President Harris in her role. Chirag serves as the Executive Secretary, and we're tasked with lots of things like reviewing and developing policy, providing those recommendations to the President on policy and strategy, synchronizing the nation's civil, commercial, and national security space activities. And we do that in furtherance of the objectives of the President's national space policy and strategy. So our superpower is convening and coordinating. And we do that with the interagency primarily, other advisors to the President, and also we convene with other stakeholders from time to time, often. At National Space Council, much of our work is organized by sector. We have leads for national security space policy, civil space policy, commercial space policy. I am the director of that. But these don't adequately encompass everything that we address. So we also have two enabling portfolios that do cross-cut all. International space policy and space STEM and workforce, which is a new one for us. And I'm pretty sure some, if not all of you, have heard Chirag refer to the metaphor, and me also echoing him, of a Venn diagram for space. So those sectors of civil, commercial, and national security space are increasingly overlapping. There's a lot going on in space right now. Just AFRL, I mean, that was a lot. We prioritize our work with the Space Priorities Framework, which was announced by the Vice President in December of 2021. And Strengthening the security of the United States Space Industrial Base is one of the ways that we maintain a robust and responsible space enterprise, and that is called out in the Space Priorities Framework. So what do we mean when we say space industrial base? I'm a lawyer. I like to get down to the nitty-gritty with definitions. And how is that different from the defense industrial base? So let's start with the defense industrial base, and I'm going to refer to that from time to time as the DIB because it's just a little easier. So the Department of Homeland Security's CISA defines the DIB as the worldwide industrial complex, enabling research and development, as well as design, production, delivery, and maintenance of military weapons systems, subsystems, and components or parts to meet U.S. military requirements. Military requirements. Certainly, that's a big topic of discussion here. This global complex or equipment, but also workforce, includes DoD components and companies, primes and subs, providing key products and services, and even incidentals in the supply chain. CISA doesn't include the commercial infrastructure of providers of services such as power, communications, transportation, or utilities that the Department of Defense uses to meet those military operational requirements. And in actuality, we have evolved to include in the DIB the supply and support of the entire government enterprise that's involved in defense purposes. So we include intelligence and the Coast Guard as well. Sometimes the DIB has a geographic component. So in U.S. Code 50 U.S.C. 4552, I told you I'm a lawyer, Congress defines the domestic industrial base a little differently than the sweeping defense industrial base that CISA defines. It means the domestic sources providing materials or services to meet national defense requirements during peacetime, national emergency, or war. And that domestic definition dates back to the Korean War and the Defense Production Act. But the idea of government support from a network of organizations and facilities to supply and equip really goes back further. We even see it as far back as the Revolutionary War. So, however, for the first 150 years, the United States didn't devote its resources to a permanent DIB. Instead, it ramped up and it stepped back, depending upon the ebb and flow between peacetime and mobilization. The foundations of today's DIB started in World War II, when the logistics and technological complexities increased so significantly that stability warranted consistent government expenditure and more permanence. But here we're talking about the space industrial base. And what do we mean? What's different? Well, first, I want to introduce to you the idea that this term, space industrial base, is not new. I've already gone down a bit of a rabbit hole with history with you, so let me share that there is a very interesting report out there in the public domain titled The Future of the U.S. Space Industrial Base, published by the then Vice President's Space Policy Advisory Board in 1992, 32 years ago. Not new, but it's full of insights applicable today, and that should make us think. This report documents the interaction between DoD and NASA. It notes that both draw from the same well, using the same technologies, human skills, sometimes common facilities, and the same incoming new entrants from academia. Absent from the discussion is mention of other key civil space operators like NOAA and the USGS. Today, Commerce's Bureau of Industry and Security and NASA are conducting an assessment of the civil space industrial base, primarily to improve our understanding of its supply chain. But this highlights our understanding that there is a distinction between the industrial base that supports national security and that which supports civil endeavors like climate science and exploration. The distinction between the DIB and the space industrial base is becoming increasingly apparent today because of the essential role that the wider global economy of to the wider global economy of space-based capabilities like GPS and imagery and real-time communication. Space drives global businesses. But even in 1992, a robust private sector was understood, at least by some. And one of my favorite parts of this report is this quote: "There is increasing recognition that a space program that focuses only on government needs without regard to a healthy commercial sector is not complete, nor will it be competitive in the international market. A healthy commercial sector. So let's unpack that. We opine long and often about the benefits that industry brings to the government. Things like lower costs, agility and accelerated set schedules, improved performance, expanded capacity, and innovation. A diversified and competitive private sector supports these outcomes. Recognizing these benefits, and in order to right-size our space industrial base, both DoD and the Space Force have recently provided us with strategies to improve the integration of commercial capabilities into their missions. And these strategies work together, emphasizing the importance of commercial companies and providing prioritized demand signals with intention. We are scrutinizing our procurement processes and implementing acquisition strategies to leverage some of these commercial capabilities and the benefits they bestow while they're still cutting edge. However, it is not only the speed of innovation that makes for a healthy commercial space sector, and that provides government the fullest array of potential benefits. We need to avoid private sector overdependence on government programs. We need to ensure that businesses, in particular startups, are developing skills and capabilities that enable them to succeed outside the closed loop of government procurement, skills and capabilities in market development. I mentioned startups, and I was so happy to hear you call out. We're going to kind of like intersect on 2 points. So this is the first one about small business. So our private sector is replete with fantastic concepts in development by an entire range of business models, from the primes to small non-traditional companies. Small businesses are very important to the Biden-Harris administration. Congress, too, recognizes the role of small business in our nation's well-being and has established a government-wide policy of promoting them. The United States government benefits from diverse participation in procurement through increased competition, which in turn can result in better pricing and better quality. Small businesses are known for their innovative potential, and spreading government dollars across a number of companies can spread and minimize risk as well as save money, since a greater percentage of funds received go into end items and not oversight. We have devoted a goodly amount of discourse on the challenges that startups face from a funding perspective, timelines, a need for earlier requirements, to name but some. One of the recommendations that flowed from last year's State of the Space Industrial Base report, and I'm going to get to some more of that in a minute, was to improve access to financial tools. So some of those tools are awards for research and development through Small Business Innovation Research, Small Business Technology Transfer Awards, but they only go so far. As we all know, we just heard a little bit about that, leaving many to wring their hands once confronted with the prospect of how to commercialize their product or their service as they enter the valley between phase 2 and phase 3. Commercializing is the key here. I don't want to spend my time with you talking about whether we should raise the limits of phases 1 and 2. I do want to address how to improve the metrics we use to assess our success in granting awards. I want to stress the importance of helping our startups create markets for their commercial solutions to space-related problems writ large. When we, the government, invest in small business startups, we need to help them succeed because we benefit when they do. NASA's pretty good at working with new entrants and small businesses and has been for quite some time. Look at CLIPS. The national security part of our space industrial base is catching up. That's why we have those strategies I mentioned earlier. And one of the tools we have at our disposal program does pair mentor companies, primes, with protege companies like startups, and they form a joint venture. Currently, we assess program success using metrics like the dollar value of contracts and the number of those contracts. It would be great to see these metrics expand to include independent criteria assessing commercialization, that the newly developed things or services are for sale to the public by the protege firm, that the protege firm does have an increase in number, size, and kind of commercial sales, both domestic and international, because that is commercialization, not codependency, which is never a good thing. But it's symbiosis. Both benefit, but can stand separate. It's so much healthier. So I said I would get to last year's recommendations. Here we go. I'd like to share with you some of the things that we at National Space Council are doing about those. I started out talking about our space priorities framework, and I'm going to revisit this. In there, we commit to a policy and regulatory environment, subject of a few things during this week, that is timely and responsive, that enables competition and growth, with clear roles and responsibilities for government and the private sector, and to include novel activities. In your major finding to streamline the bureaucracy, you note bureaucratic inefficiency and regulation. So I want to respond to that by saying that some of this isn't bureaucrats being bureaucrats, but a workforce challenge. We need more folks that are trained to do the things that the regulators need, because they're suffering from workforce issues, as are you. National Space Council has been hard at work for the past few years, raising awareness of how cool it is to work in space, yes, but also helping all levels of educators and training personnel to develop programs, apprenticeships, as well as academic curriculum. Also, in that section, there is a call for a centralized approach, dare I say one-stop shop, it makes me shudder, to regulation of industry. I want to challenge the assumption that this would provide this scalable flexibility that we need. And I want to bring your attention to the National Space Council's legislative proposal for novel activities, including things like space mobility and logistics. We do not support a monolithic one-stop. That would take an enormous amount of planning and resources and bipartisan functionality. And perhaps it's something to start strategizing for and to think about in the very long term. Kind of like your last point, Colonel Raley, about, there are some things that you discuss, you work on, and you table. Instead, we see nearer term goodness in drawing upon existing expertise in the Departments of Commerce and Transportation, with a consultative process to bring in federal government expertise from other departments and agencies as our missions continue to evolve and scale. Our proposal provides clear roles and responsibilities. National Space Council also provided a companion framework, which consists of principles to guide government space oversight now and in the future, and actions that we can take now to prepare for the time someday when we see enactment. It also stands up an interagency steering group to begin work on how best to support and oversee novel activities even before companies apply for licenses. So you also recommended an update to export controls. Yes, at our third National Space Council meeting in December of 2023, Vice President Harris tasked us with export control modernization. And I can tell you that the Departments of Commerce and State are hard at work. I'm cracking my whip. They're doing it. So I started by saying that there's a lot going on. There is. So I hope that this year's MADE conference and the workshops that you hold throughout the year take note of my message. Industry must develop markets while it develops technology and capabilities, much of which will be used by the government. We must take action to avoid a closed loop where industry is overly dependent upon the government, and we need to explore how to support small businesses in meaningful ways that support commercialization. So I thank you for your attention. I left time so that you would have room for questions if you wanted to ask me some. And so have at it. Thank you.
Hi, ma'am. Thank you. Can you guys hear me? Okay.
Loud and clear.
Thank you very much for coming to Albuquerque. My name is Carol Welsh. I'm a consultant here in town. I support NewSpace Nexus. as well as a number of small companies. So I'd like to ask this question really on behalf of the small companies that I've had the pleasure to work with. What I have seen over the last years is these companies come up with brilliant ideas. Colonel Raley and his team go through heroics to try to get what they can on orbit. The flight experimentation process that you mentioned, I've had the opportunity to observe how many great candidates come forward to him, but he only has limited funding. So my question is, has NSC looked at
NSBC. NSC is the National Security Council.
have you looked at how to help these companies cross that infamous huge valley of death between when they finish a phase 2 and getting that capability on orbit? Because it does seem to be the big challenge for many of them to overcome.
Well, that's exactly what I'm talking about. I'm thinking, what I'm suggesting is, and I think there's two parts of this. I think part of it is government to help with the tools, but also it's on industry also to make sure that they don't completely geek out on all those brilliant ideas, but also work on the market development at the same time. So what do we do at National Space Council? Our doors are open. There are a number of smaller companies that are here in this room that know that all they have to do is send me an email, and if they're in DC, I'm happy to set up a meeting with them at EEOB where I, basically share the wealth of knowledge with all of my EOP colleagues, but also we'll do virtual briefings just, to make sure that we have awareness. And that makes a difference because we work super closely with OMB. Policy is great, beautiful words on paper, but unless you implement and you have the resources to implement, you really don't have anything. And so a good deal of our work is implementing fantastic policies that we inherited from other administrations before, but also making sure that OMB is in those discussions when companies come and tell us those brilliant ideas that they have so that we can make sure. So, there was, $20 million for SML. That's largely because we were very aware. And so this is an example. But I think a lot of it is also there are skills that go into market development that we shouldn't let just fall by the wayside. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Sure.
And
Don't ma'am me.
I would love to perhaps chat later
Please.
about some of the specific things that really come back to resources. And
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for coming to Albuquerque.
Thank you so much. It was a struggle to get here. So you must know I really want to be here. It took 15 hours.
Dr. Howard,
Yeah.
I'm actually
morning.
looking at the camera. If you want to question, please.
I've got the mic back here. Dr. Howard, could you talk a little bit about the Venn diagram between the space industrial base and the defense industrial base? Your talk implied that they're not.
They're not
quite
quite
as
the same.
They're
No.
not the same. I
No.
agree that they're not the same, but I don't think they're.
So not
entirely
everything in the
different.
space industrial base is in the defense industrial base, and not everything in the defense industrial base is in the space industrial base. Although I think that we've come to understand and acknowledge that space is definitely an enabler of a lot of the rest of the industrial base, but the defense industrial base. But it isn't exactly like one is a subset of the other, and that's why, I thought about that a great deal over the Memorial Day weekend, and it is more like a Venn diagram, like there's an intersection, and there's an awareness that even though we come from the same well as that 1992 report was even aware of back then, we also have a little bit of a difference in our supply chain. So, does that help, Ruth?
We'll talk some more.
If you want to
Okay.
come up here. Be on the big screen.
Coming.
You're
Good to
welcome.
See you again.
Yeah.
2 points. One, in 2023, Commerce's Bureau of Industrial Security did a call to commercial space companies
Right.
asking about their participation. The last question of the 31 pages of that survey, one question asked about the financial health or instability of the companies, right? And I've been in touch with the director of that. What are you going to do with the answer to that question of the financial viability or fragility of companies supplying commercial space activities? That's the first question. The second question is, You and I have a history, and we know that a particular proposal that I made was attempted to be, the polite word would be purloined by an FFRDC and some others. What are you doing to protect SMEs with their bright ideas from being ripped off?
Well, we're just like 8 or 10 people in the White House, so we're doing what we can. So what we do is when we're aware of that, and I think, the thing that of which you speak, I think it was maybe an idea, again, a little ahead of its time. And then it kind of got overcome by a lot of events and geopolitically, but also from a public health standpoint. So I think, you kind of have to take a step back and look at the big picture. At the end of the day, the financial health of companies is very, very important. And it's in the best interest of our nation to make sure that we do things to help them be financially healthy. And so that's why, we decided that the best thing that we could share here was that we do really think that we need to help, in particular, our smaller businesses, but also help our primes help our smaller businesses, not just, do this joint venture, but also help them develop the tools to develop those markets so that they do become healthier. I think the workforce is another big issue that helps our companies become healthier. So we're doing what we can with that. More than that, I cannot say. I mean, we are not an acquisition office. What we are is a policy development office and mainly an implementer. So we shepherd process more than anything. And that's not so easy. So in order to do much of anything, we have to get buy-in from the entire interagency. So I would suggest that the Department of Commerce, not BIS, but actually the Office of Space Commerce, my former home, is a very good place for companies to begin because they are your advocates in the executive branch. And they, if they don't know the answer, they know who will have it. So I would suggest that. I know you.
One more?
Yeah.
Yes, thanks. Great to see you again.
Nice to see you too.
Check. Great to see you again. When last we enjoyed dinner, you shared our mutual backgrounds with universities, specifically Embry-Riddle.
Mhm.
You mentioned the talent industrial base as an important part of the space industrial base and the military industrial base, defense industrial base. What suggestions would you have? We need much more involvement from universities as a source of the talent that you mentioned and increasing the workforce. And so what were some suggestions or some activities that you're doing at the council to be able to increase that, to be able to have more universities here, more universities in everything that we do every step of the way?
So we've been doing an awful lot at all different levels, but I mentioned that we have a space STEM and workforce policy lead, and she right now is putting together a thing, Find Your Place in Space. It's a big thing, and it's been, at NASCAR, and we've got Black Space Week that's going on. We had, a thing that was coinciding with the eclipse, which was Your Place in Space and opening the doors and having sort of a national open house, trying to raise awareness. So that's one thing. But another thing that we're doing right now is looking not just from the top level and the national programs and this national outreach, but looking at states like, I see Dale in the back, like Florida and look at New Mexico. I walked in and I saw this fantastic infographic, and I remember taking a tour here in New Mexico a couple of years ago and seeing the beginnings of that infographic come to light. So there are some states that are really doing a good job, and then there are some states that really want to learn how to do a good job. And so we're working on right now some of our own infographic, if you will. So some of the different questions to be asked and the different metrics to use to assess the success rate of those different states on the state level, because it's not just universities, it's also training programs and apprenticeships. It's across the board. So I think that that's what we all do. We start where we are, we share what we know. I think partnerships, we heard that in the very beginning of Colonel Raley, and I think that that's how we continue to build it. Well, and I will, I still have one toe in academia. So thank you. Thank you.
I have a little gift for you. Oh, don't fall. Thank you. That was awesome. And Robert and Dr. Irwin and myself will be talking about some of the workforce efforts that we're getting to start, and that'll be tomorrow. Next, I'm really happy. One of our key partners is the COMSO office, and I'm happy to introduce Colonel Richard Kniseley, who will be presenting virtually. You'll see soon. He is a senior material leader for Commercial Space Office, which they call the COMSO. And Colonel Kniseley leads a 90 personnel office that assesses, implements, integrates, and monitors commercial space capabilities for the Department of Defense. He's enacting the buy before build. Actually, that's a terminology that came out of the 2020 State of the Space Industrial Base, so we're happy to hear that now. But that paradigm shift to make sure that the government is a good partner in buying before they fund the build. So Colonel Kniseley executes over $1 billion in investments, mitigating critical capability gaps for the warfighter, while interacting with senior Department of the Air Force members, congressional staff, and leaders of industry. I also would like to say that his deputy for the Commercial Space Office here is Jeremy Leader. So you can we'll be able to hear Colonel Kniseley's sage remarks right now, and then we will have some time for Q&A. Thank you, Colonel Kniseley, for joining us.
Hey, good morning. Can you hear me? Okay, I'll take that as a yes. Awesome. So thank you very much for that kind introduction. Also, thank you for pointing out Jeremy Leader. So all hard questions go to him. He is very knowledgeable about everything, gets me off the hook. But anyways, thank you very much for that kind introduction. Thank you very much to NewSpace Nexus for hosting this awesome event. Also a special thank you to Casey and Ariel, who provided excellent logistical support. And a special shout out to Scott Sadler, who keeps us all up to speed, informed on all things space through his NewSpace Sadler report. So I do apologize for being coming to you virtually and not there in person. I'm supporting some important meetings out here in DC, but it was really important to speak to you all today on these awesome topics. Selfishly, I really actually wanted to also be out there and get some good Mexican food out at Sadie's. So hopefully you all are participating and eating some of that. I am just very humbled to speak to you today about SSC's Commercial Space Office. I can definitely tell you our entire staff of Guardians, Airmen, Civil Service members, and contractor support here at COMSO are just very focused on partnering with industry and our other government partners. We are equally focused on integrating commercial capabilities in our technology roadmaps and operations while delivering at speed those very same game-changing commercial capabilities and innovative capabilities to our warfighter. We've made a lot of changes. We've realized a lot of progress in the young year that we've been in existence, and we're just only getting started. Each day at SSC, we're galvanized by a singular focus, and that is to outthink, outpace, and ultimately outmaneuver the multifaceted threats we face in an increasingly congested, contested, and competitive space domain. But those threats aren't just existing in space. According to the Space ISAC, the full extent of China's cyber capabilities are more significant than have ever been previously acknowledged. China possesses a more extensive hacking program than every other nation combined. Multiple China-backed cyber proxies have been targeting U.S. Entities with sophisticated cyber attacks. These cyber attacks, if successful, would affect the entire space industry, given the attack vector, but also impair and potentially degrade U.S. and U.S. allied foreign relationships. Chinese cyber attacks are progressing from endpoint devices and are now targeting internet-facing devices such as routers, servers, or VPN services. Thankfully, groups like Space ISAC and the Commercial Integration Cell exist today to share threat-related data with industry. In order to stay ahead of these threats, we must continue to expand collaboration between the DoD and the commercial sector. Ours is a mutually beneficial relationship that strengthens national security and enhances the resilience of critical infrastructure while informing industry with the latest threats and best practices in our rapidly changing environment. So using the threat discussion as a backdrop, I'd like to talk about the recently released Space Force commercial strategy. Beyond defense and security applications, space is the backbone of modern society, enabling agriculture, commerce, travel, communications, power grids, and financial networks, among others. As outlined in the National Defense Strategy, we must tap into American entrepreneurship, innovation, and vibrant competitive markets in order to be successful and sustain competitive advantage across the spectrum of conflict in this era of great power competition. Signed by both the CSO and the Space Service Acquisition Executive, the Space Force's commercial space strategy is an acquisitions and operational commitment to optimize the integration of commercial capabilities focused on improving the resiliency of our nation's space enterprise. The strategy purposefully nests within OSD's 4 guiding principles for effective integration. We will appropriately balance government and commercial solutions. We will strengthen interoperability between government and commercial solutions without stifling innovation, speed, or scale. We will strengthen resilience by increasing the number of commercial providers, diversifying supply chains, and expanding the variety of solutions used. And lastly, we will continue to support responsible conduct as defined by international norms and the DoD tenets of responsible behavior in space. The Space Force's commercial space strategy has 4 lines of effort: collaborative transparency, operational and technical integration, risk management, and securing the future. The Space Force will depend on industry support and active engagement to achieve success across each line of effort. The following 4 considerations will inform Space Force's decision-making related to utilization of commercial space solutions: operational utility, feasibility, resilience by design, and speed of fielding. Please take the time to familiarize yourself with the commercial space strategy. A thorough understanding of the guiding principles, lines of effort, and evaluation criteria will help our industry partners better understand our needs and what they can do to help us meet them. What I like about the commercial strategy is that it doesn't provide all the answers. What it does is frames discussions, conditions, and processes necessary to accelerate the purposeful pursuit of hybrid space architectures. What my team and I have found through engagement with industry is that you want to be part of the solution and not bound by convention. The Space Force must harness technological innovation and emerging capabilities if we are going to outcompete our competitors. Otherwise, we all lose. So come with your ideas, keep maturing your solutions, and any potential fight with a pacing challenge, it will require all hands on deck. But now the more important and urgent question: where do we go from here? Per the commercial space strategy, the Space Force, at a minimum, seeks commercial sector support in the following prioritized areas: SATCOM, space domain awareness, SAML, TAC SRT, space-based environmental monitoring, cyberspace operations, command and control, and positioning, navigation, and timing. That being said, The Space Force is constantly evaluating ways and mission areas and that the commercial market can provide capabilities, allowing the Space Force to field capabilities faster and onboard innovation. The Space Force is currently building new commercial marketplaces to facilitate commercial collaboration and lower barrier of entry. We've gone beyond space domain awareness, and we have now incorporated TAC SRT, and many more mission areas will follow. To date, our TAC SRT team has delivered over 240 operational planning products, supporting combatant command, warfighting, and humanitarian missions. Some examples include analysis of illegal resource extraction, damage assessment due to storms and floods, sources of chemical spills, and tracking Russian shadow tanker vessels. These incredible planning products have been delivered on average in less than 72 hours and are all unclassified commercial data, all of which can be easily shared with our partners. The U.S. Southcom Director of Space Forces recently described the TAC SRT initiative, saying, "In 22 years of service as a space operator, I've never been involved in a more tactical application of space capability. All of this is facilitated by our global data marketplace, which is managed by SSC. Space Systems Command also continues to lead the way in integrating commercial space domain awareness data into operations. This is being done through the Joint Commercial Ops Center, or JCO. This capability is now running 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It is being operated by the U.S. and 13 allied nations, and we already have 3 more allied nations in the training queue. The JCO executes current operational timelines with minimal development activities beyond the day-to-day technical alignment and stability of commercial upgrades into operations. The JCO provides shareable alerts and notifications that queue higher side activities across the U.S. Space Command Joint Operational Area. Space Systems Command is also planning several reverse industry days this year, including discussions on cognitive space operations. In fact, that reverse industry day will be held in late June. Battle management, command, control, and communication ground infrastructure, and also CASR. We recently hosted a successful weather summit and are targeting August to have our next CASR industry session, where prior to that, we will release a number of documents for industry review and comment. But most of all, across our mission areas, the common access point for commercial collaboration for the U.S. Space Force and SSC is our front door. COMSO is set up to welcome industries and technologies through our front door, then evaluate those companies on their technology, financial and management viability, and ability to provide capabilities that are truly needed in our space architectures. If you're serious about collaboration with Space Force and SSC, if you want to understand our mission areas, or you want details on our upcoming industry engagements, I highly encourage you all to visit the front door. Go on the Google front door. It's the first link that pops up. Which brings me to a very fun subject, funding. Many of you know that the FY24 appropriations bill created a new commercial services program element in the Space Force RDT&E budget. We are working closely with OSD, the executive branch, and Congress to establish a consistent and flexible funding strategy for onboarding, integrating, and acquiring commercial capabilities. We already have the means to advance small businesses and commercial capabilities through SpaceWorks, DIU, and the Office of Space Capital. We are currently funding multiple pathfinding initiatives like the TAC SRT pilot using existing investment funding. But we need to have dedicated funding to enable the implementation and integration phases of our programs and enable procurement of those commercial goods and services to deliver on warfighter needs. And lastly, under the category of coming soon, I do want to highlight the ongoing effort called the Commercial Augmentation Space Reserve, or CASR. This was recently highlighted in the Space Force Commercial Strategy and was also entered into the House Armed Services Committee mark recently. It just shows how CASR just shows how serious we are about integrating commercial into our military space capabilities. We believe in you. We believe in your contributions. We want to ensure we're ready to leverage the best capabilities, government and commercial, the Space Force has to offer during peacetime and through any potential spectrum of conflict. Once we're able to integrate your capabilities into our operational units, you have the option to participate as a CASR company and join our team, not just in peacetime, but committing your company to help defend America and its allies when you're needed the most. As a CASR member, your peacetime contracts will enable us the flexibility to exercise, wargame, integrate, and operate your capabilities, ensuring our operators and allies are knowledgeable of your game-changing capabilities and are able to seamlessly integrate them into the space enterprise. We are currently building out our strategies for threat sharing, incentives to join CASR, working with the operational community to develop CONOPS, and building out the plans for a CASR war game. To make this a success, we will continue to have conversations with industry, release documents for review and comments, and build more partnerships with government entities. This is a voluntary partnership. Industry is our partner. We want this program to be something that you want to be a part of. My goal is to be positioned to award initial CASR contracts this year. We are really looking forward to working more closely with all of you on this effort moving forward. So in closing, and before any questions, I'd like to thank you all once again for the opportunity to address you today, and thank you to NewSpace Nexus for hosting this excellent event. Over the course of the next few days, I hope you make great connections and enjoy increased collaboration on how to tackle some obstacles in the space enterprise. Please align some of those thoughts with the Space Force commercial strategy, and then reach out to myself or members of my team, and let's work together. In today's contested and congested space domain, our current geopolitical climate and the ongoing pressures to deliver faster and more efficiently, we need and want a village of people, companies, and organizations working together and willing to do things differently. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, and thank you for joining us. Let's see, how about one question? He said he would take questions from the audience. So I'm not sure if you can see the audience. Oh, sure. Oh, come up. If you could come up here, please.
I'll just say, in case some of you missed it, there was a pretty fulsome article in Defense One today that highlighted some of what Colonel Kniseley just spoke about with the CASR.
Hold on, the CASR. Okay. Yep. Here you go, sir.
Kevin Brown with All Points. Morning, Colonel. Thanks for taking the time. Question for you. Do you have thoughts on the idea of combining private investment with government funding to create a capability? Perhaps even a success story or two where that has worked out well.
Can you repeat that really quick? Are you saying a strategy for combining investments with government funding?
I'm thinking situations where a public-private partnership could combine private investment from the capital markets with appropriated government funds to create a capability that perhaps neither one would afford or have an appropriate return on investment alone?
So I would definitely like to bring us back to launch as a traditional launch person. Uh, you know, we were charged many years ago for getting off of the RD-180 engine when Russia invaded Crimea. And I actually was, blessed to be on the Mitchell study, which examined that. But one of the outcomes out of that was to invest in industry to develop a replacement engine, if you will. And that was done through private partnerships, working with industry, where we contributed government dollars with private investment, and we did that, and we produced an engine that will be, has demoed and is we're hoping to work very soon. That investment also translated into developing the rocket around that engine. So we do have a history in doing this. I think it was a very worthwhile venture. I am a big believer in it, especially when we're starting to develop huge, robust capabilities, while also kind of going back to what Dr. Howard was talking about, to maintain a way for it to remain commercial as as well. Having those early investments with the government allows us to make sure our requirements are being met while also tapping into the commercial market. So that is one of my, that's probably the best example that I have, but definitely open to more opportunities, especially when we're looking to onboard more commercial capabilities faster and more reliably into the market. I do want to kind of go back to what I was saying. I think we have some abilities through SpaceWorks and DIU, especially with SpaceWorks and their StratFi, where we do have, to a smaller scale, a public-private partnership, but I think it needs to be expanded if we're going after a larger mission area.
Hi there. Thank you, sir. And we hope to see you in Albuquerque next time or very soon, or we'll visit you in your office. I think the COMSO office is very exciting. The way it's been put together and it'll support all of our companies that we work with day to day. Again, Jeremy, would you stand up? So you're going to get inundated, but this is a deputy, so you could go find him and thank you, Colonel Kniseley.
Give him all the hard questions.
All right, thank you. With that, we're going to take just a 10-minute break and then come back, and we have some great presentations on international update, and then we have a great lunch presentation, and then we'll hear from Colonel Roth after lunch. So go take a quick break, come back. Oh, hello. Okay, let's start making it to your seat. Welcome to Mars. Yeah, okay. I want to be telling you all as you're getting to your seats, if you tried to set up the Wi-Fi and it wasn't working again, it should be working now. On my phone, I had to go stop the Wi-Fi and restart it again. So for all of you, it should be the Marriott Bonvoy Conference Wi-Fi, and there's no password. Getting quiet. Are we ready? All right, I'm excited. So we have Dr. Goswami speaking it a few times, and I thought each time I'm going to maybe highlight a little different thing, but I'm really excited to have Dr. Namrata Goswami joined us again this year to give us a international update. And she's always very informed, very interesting. And she is an author and educator specializing in space policy, international relations, and ethnic identity. She teaches at the Thunderbird School of Global Management at ASU and at the Joint Special Forces University. She's also testified before the U.S.-China Economic Security Review Commission on China's space program, so very knowledgeable. And she has co-authored with Dr. Peter Gerritsen over here, The Scramble for the Skies, the Great Power Competition to Control the Resources of Outer Space, which was published in 2020. So please welcome Dr. Goswami.
Thank you, Casey, and it's a delight to be back in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I love the environment here and an escape from humid Alabama, so that's wonderful. So how do I move the slides forward? I just tell them? Okay, all right, well, thank you. Yeah. So today, what I'm going to do, listening to the speeches we heard, is to talk a little bit about the geopolitical environment, as well as why this is actually important for a conference like this. So I would think that when we think about the state of the space industrial base, the most important thing in terms of the purpose of even trying to understand the state of the space industrial base is to recognize and deeply understand what the United States is about and why should the United States maintain its leadership position in space. And I say that because in terms of my engagement around the world, you will be happy to know that there are several nations and societies that still look to the United States to offer a moral normative framework when it comes to engaging not just with space, but with other entities as well. And in that framework, what is really vital to realize, and if you see the first slide there, is that the discourse on space is changing very fast across the world. And that's something I thought I'll bring to bear for your own analysis and as you go through the different workshops. So one thing is very vital, and which is that major nations around the world, and I'll speak of two nations, and then I'll have a panel on international partnerships on Friday, where we'll talk a little bit about Japan, African countries, and Latin American countries, is that space is becoming a very vital part of their comprehensive national power. So besides what we heard today, how space helps in terms of agriculture, weather forecasting, communications, navigation, space is also vital for military projection of power from the operational and strategic side. And that I see in the programs of the two countries I'll talk about, China and India. This is the most game-changing shift in the 21st century, the third line in my slide, which is that if you look at the programs of China and India today, they are no more about just sending humans to a particular place in space, but actually working towards developing permanent presence capability. I'll show you India's latest space vision that they put out last year, which is an update from my presentation from last year here. And you'll see how India is changing the game within its own space institutional structure as well. So that's a very game-changing event, I think, in terms of space, which is not Apollo-type missions, but more the Chang'e mission that is going to land this weekend on the far side of the moon's south pole for the first time, and trying to bring back samples for the first time again from the lunar south pole by China. The other thing which is very important in terms of an international landscape is that nations are actually investing in long-term planning. So there is a growing realization in countries like China and India that space has to be funded long-term. It is not even enough to have 5-year funding cycles. We'll have to have 10-year, 20-year funding cycles. China is actually quite good at this, and India has picked up that particular insight as well. The other thing, which I think the US has actually set a very great example to the world, is the rise of the private sector. We heard from Dr. Howard how this was a particular thinking even in 1992. And so today you see that countries like China and India have actually institutionalized new entities to encourage their own private sector. And this includes countries like Japan, South Korea, Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore as well, and the African Union that just established the African Space Agency. There is a growing importance of space from civil and military activities. The other interesting thing, which I think we should speak about in this conference, is that nations are also talking about space, not just from the traditional idea of space, which is about PNT and navigation, but also about the utilization of space resources. And I'll show that in the slides that I'll have for you in a few minutes. And then, of course, I just gave you a data of how many launches happened in 2023, and the US still leads, especially with SpaceX, but China also launched quite a lot, and India is the third nation. Next slide, please. So this is China's grand strategy in space. I always like to put that forward in terms of framing China's space program. And this actually got vindicated with the current reorganization of the PLA Strategic Support Force, which got disbanded, which was their version of the Space Force, with the establishment of the Aerospace Force that just happened. And I'll tell you a little bit about the thinking of China as to why they went about doing that. So one thing about China and the aerospace forces dictate is that from President Xi and the Central Military Commission is to ensure strategic focus and maintain China's access to space. That's one of the main direction that has come at the highest level of Communist Party leadership. The second important thing is that China does want to extend its influence and power in this domain. We heard from Colonel Raley about how we need to have domain superiority, and we have to move from services culture to a domain culture. And China is definitely basically picking up that particular rationale as well. The third thing is that a country like China is talking a lot about the economic returns from space. So some of their very leading thinkers, we have heard about how great minds think alike quite a lot today. In China, the great minds of their space scientists and PLA officers are talking about how space can actually return about $10 trillion if done successfully and efficiently by 2050 from the Earth-Moon system, which is how they define cislunar space. They think also that space is very vital for their national development. And since 2021, they talked about integration. So we heard a lot about integration today. China is also establishing at the Communist Party. For them, integration happens through the party. So the Central Military Commission, the Politburo, and there's a unit called Civil Military Integration Unit that was established in 2021. Next slide, please. So I would say that from last year to this year, I think these are the game changers for the international space engagement as well as space policy. One is that China is the only nation that has very seriously studied and is now doing demonstration phase for their space-based solar power project. The chart you see there is a chart that was basically showcased by the China Academy of Space Technology and the China National Space Administration. And the one thing when you want to understand China is that it's vital to understand how policy process works. And so in this context, what really was the insight I got when I visited China was that the provinces of China got interested in space-based solar power. And that's a very similar trajectory for them becoming the leader in rare earth minerals, ground solar, shipbuilding, and now going into artificial intelligence, quantum, robotics, and space. So space-based solar power is there. The second game changer is, of course, their lunar mission, which is the Chang'e lunar missions. And as I said, they want to establish a base by 2036. Their timelines have been given out. And that's a depiction from the China National Space Administration and Roscosmos of their base and what they want to achieve. And what is interesting is that they include space-based solar power, but they also include nuclear power propulsion and energy. And if you compare, for example, NASA's plan, go to SPD 6, Space Policy Directive 6, and the Chinese plan, there's a big difference. China wants to be able to do about 1 megawatt of nuclear energy, whereas NASA has been tasked with about 40 kilowatt. So you can see if you go to the detail, there's a difference in terms of their base structure as well. Next slide, please. And then these are, again, going to be game changers. And you see that slide on your right side? This is China's commercial sector getting involved in building China's low Earth constellations. So G60, of course, you've heard of G60. They have just registered to launch about 13,000 satellites by 2030. They have just launched their first fleet. And the hope is that by 2030, in collaboration with the China Academy of Space Technology, they will have one of the largest alternative low Earth orbit constellation. But not just that, they are also hoping to build medium Earth orbit and geosynchronous orbit. So they're looking at all three orbital slots. And if you're interested, I do have documented writings on Chinese thinkers and the scientists and the engineers behind these projects and why they think all three orbits are very vital. So in Chinese thinking, it is very vital to have tactical diversified launch capability. So it's not just liquid propelled rockets, but also solid. Very important to have rockets that can launch from mobile platforms. So they have the capability today to launch from the sea with the Long March 8. And they also want to build capability to launch, for example, from a desert if they have to. The idea is that if a satellite or a fleet of satellite gets damaged, they can very quickly replace it. And so that's a focus. And then Long March 9. So the Long March 9 last year, after I gave a presentation in this workshop, in this conference, became reusable. And that's a very interesting development for me, because when I asked them in my visits to China if they are looking at Starship, they were very not confident at that time. That was about 3 years ago. And so today, they actually have come up with the plans, very clear as to how Long March 9 is. And the hope is that by 2030, the Long March 9 will be able to lift about 140 metric tons to low Earth orbit, competing with Starship. The most interesting thing about their building of project, and that is where we heard today, purpose, strategy, long-term goal. The designers of the Long March 9 very clearly tell you why they want to build this, to build capability for permanent presence, to support China's plans for their lunar base and lunar development, and to support Mars missions. The Long March 5 is for low Earth orbit and others, including with their private space sector. So again, you see the connecting of technology to strategy and long-term goal. So they're not developing technology for technology's sake. They're connecting it to their larger long-term vision. Next slide, please. And this is, again, I think, game changer. The reorganization of their military services. They have been doing it since 2012. With President Xi coming to power, he very clearly argued that if China wants to become a major player in the international system, the military has to reform. It cannot be an army-heavy Russian structure. It has to be a joint force. So he has been not very happy with some of the reforms happening. And so you see this continuous reforming, and they have done about 600 workshops within the PLA. And what is most astounding in Chinese history is that President Xi Jinping is the first president to actually chair those workshops. It's never happened before. So you can see the seriousness with which they're taking this. What I get from this, the overarching, not very substantial framing is that this is about corruption. I don't agree. If you look at the speeches he has given, the internal discussions within the Central Military Commission and the People's Liberation Army, he wants to ensure that China's ability to have domain expertise is done very well by super specializing with the cyber force, the aerospace force, the joint support, the joint logistics support force. And so what they are pointing out is that they want to build domain expertise, but within a very clear monolithic structure, which is that they all report to the Central Military Commission, which is a civilian body. And so you see these changes, and I think these are game changers. Of course, they are thinking about the Taiwan scenario, but they are also thinking about space in this particular integration. Next slide, please. So these are some of the key drivers. Could you please skip pressing it so that all the drivers come? So I won't read through all these drivers for their space program, but looking at their official space policy documents that they have been issuing for several years now, the speeches of China's major leaders, the discussions within the PLA, this is what I could collate in terms of their drivers. So of course, economic and commercial benefit, resource exploitation and utilization, scientific and technological capability development, national security, planetary defense, very important part of China's program, and national prestige. Next slide, please. And then keep pressing so that it, and these are the key objectives of their space program. So of course, expansion, and basically building into the capabilities that I'm talking about in the last few minutes before. Next slide, please. Can you keep pressing? So if you look at their focus for the next few years, you can see from this slide that they do want to build their space-based solar power capability. Also, they are building a space plane capability, and then building, as I mentioned, their Tiangong as well as their permanent presence in space, completely being able to do technology demonstration like space-based solar power, power beaming, low Earth constellation projects, but most importantly, they're also focused on in-space manufacturing, utilization, and how to scale that up. So that's a part of their focus for the next few years. Next slide, please. China's Mars ambition. So before I go to India, I would say that one of the most fascinating insights I get from China's space program is that they do have a long-term focus in trying to become a Mars-capable space nation. They are the first Asian nation, as you know, that landed on Mars and communicated back successfully. The next mission is going to be a sample return mission that they're hoping to achieve by 2030. And they're already starting to do their simulation and demonstrations as we speak. Next slide, please. So the one thing that this year, and this is something that we need to think through when we think about China's interesting play at the level of the United Nations. So this year, China was very unclear whether space resource utilization is a legal activity under the Outer Space Treaty. They had not been very clear in their position. They had not been officially critical of the Artemis Accords, but they had lawyers who were critical. But this year, they actually put forward their position at the United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs in March of this year. And they argued that within the Outer Space Treaty, space resource utilization is absolutely legal. And the most interesting development is that they have put their Chang'e missions in that particular framework officially. So this is something that I had asked them several times, whether Chang'e mission is a part of the official space resource utilization goal. They were not very clear in the beginning, but this paper makes it very clear that that's what they're actually going for. And by resource utilization, I mean helium-3 on the moon, water, ice, as well as rare earth minerals or platinum group minerals that are there. Next slide, please. So this is now India. India has changed the game last year. One is, of course, we all celebrated the landing of India's first mission, Chandrayaan-3 on the moon. That actually made India confident. Before that, India was not very confident. It had done very traditional space goals, including weather forecasting, communication. But this last year in December, India came up with a very ambitious space program, competing with China to an extent, but also demonstrating itself as a major space power. Next slide, please. Can you keep pressing? So these are India's space goals now. So you can see that India wants to very clearly institute a very clear structure as to how space is visualized and is going to be developed moving forward. And so India, of course, is a Department of Space, very clear on the Prime Minister's office. So it does believe in a very centralized space policymaking structure. And the Indian Space Research Organization comes under this particular structure. India instituted several new institutions. One is called the NewSpace India Limited in 2019 for commercial space integration and the development of capability. And then, of course, the National Space Promotion and Authorization Center that's going to do the licensing. Again, this was made official last year in the Indian space policy. Another very interesting development for India, because historically, India has not been very good in giving out an official space policy. So for the first time, you can see the confidence in India's space power engagement. Next slide, please. And then this is very interesting. The Indian Air Force wants to rename itself the Indian Air and Space Forces. So you can see that within India, there is a big demand that space needs to have military capability as well as national security integration. And so the Indian Air Force has submitted a proposal to rename itself the Indian Air and Space Force. There are calls for a space doctrine to be issued. What is vital is that if you look at it from a defense perspective, India for the first time put space as part of its Air Force doctrine. So they view space very similar to China as a multi-domain capability that needs long-term funding. And these are all game changers because this was never the case a few years ago. And so these are again signaling not just to your adversary, but also for partnerships, which India wants to build. Next slide, please. So then I'm just giving you a little bit of the structure in terms of what India has been doing. So they have also established a new space service called the Defense Space Agency. And then the Defense Space, basically the Defense Space Research Organization, again, focused on developing space capability. And all this India is actually doing so that it becomes a better international partner. Very similar to China, India's audience is not just the United States. It's the international world that's so fascinated and interested in space today, and is looking at countries that can offer cost-effective, cheaper ways to get to space. And India's lunar mission, which was very inexpensive if you compare it with other missions, has been a big inspiration. In the interviews I gave after it landed globally, everybody was interested in understanding how to replicate that particular program. So you can see that internationally there is an interest in India and Asian space programs in general. Next slide, please. So India also has a very vibrant private space sector. So it's very interesting how that has come about. One of the entities that I find very interesting is Skyroot, that already has a launch capability, has launched to suborbital space with the Vikram, which is named after the father of Indian space program, Vikram Sarabhai. What is interesting to me is that when I grew up in India, commercialization was not seen as a good thing. It was seen as being for profit. India, as you know, had a very socialist welfare state system. And so that is changing, and very soon. And the reason it's changing is because the younger generation, which is the age group of 25 to about 35, I do not want that structure. And so when I was there in India interviewing the NewSpace sector, all of them were very frustrated with the government for not opening it up. They put a lot of pressure on the Indian government. And you see that's why new institutions and private space sector actually already starting to show capability. And that I think is going to be a game changer, because one of the nation with the largest and the most capable workforce, we talked about workforce and the age group. If you see all the predictions, by 2040, India will have the largest science-based workforce amongst all the countries, including the United States. So that's why you can see this great demand and the need for reform today. Next slide, please. So if you look at India's space capabilities, of course, India has the capability to launch, wants to build lunar capability, including the ability to have platforms in space. India also announced that they're going to have their own space station by 2028, which is interesting because while India has signed very critical joint partnerships with the US, including their joint statement that talked about an Indian team going to the International Space Station this year, but India also has plans for their own space station. The reason is not because it's anti-US or doesn't want to collaborate, it's because within India, there is this conversation that India needs to have such capabilities of its own in terms of indigenous capability. And so there is a group that basically is the stakeholders in this particular process. So when you think about countries like China and India, it's very important to realize that there are several stakeholders that actually pushes particular space programs, and investor community is also a big part of that particular process today. Next slide, please. So again, just showing you a little bit of the capabilities. India is, of course, very proud of their Chandrayaan mission, their Venus mission, their mission to the sun that they are actually already successfully done this last year, and then entered this year, the Sun-Earth Lagrange Point 1. India has a human spaceflight program today, the Gaganyaan program. Next slide, please. And these are the astronauts that were named very recently. And huge conversation within India about this, why were they chosen? Most of them are fighter test pilots, and so that's a reason why. And so it's interesting that, and the most important development, I think, is the space vision. And you will be shocked at what is in the space vision. I was shocked. Next slide, please. So these are, of course, the space vision and India's lunar program. So if you see, India now has very clear phases of their lunar program, and this is new. It was not the case before the Chandrayaan-3. Even last year, we didn't have this in May, but we had this in December. So India wants to actually have a lunar base as well and send humans to the moon by 2040. And the Chandrayaan-3, the Chandrayaan-4, the Chandrayaan-5 are going to be basically testing that particular capability for India's space program. Next slide, please. And so this is the chart that India put out last year. And when I saw this chart, it was very interesting to me because if you look at the last, the last section, you see space mining, you see interplanetary travel, you see space-based deterrence capability. And then what is interesting is that India is talking about reusable rocket and reusable launch capability. And then the most fascinating part to me is that for a country that had to explain to its people, why is it investing in space, and to explain to the common person that this is about your benefit, is today talking about utilizing its human space program, not because of prestige, but because of space tourism. So when the Indian minister responsible for space was questioned in parliament as to why do India need to have a human space program at all, it's a waste of money, he argued that actually the benefits and the potential and the low cost that India can offer the world will offer revenues to the Indian citizen. So do you see how the framing of their space program is changing just in the last few years? Next slide, please. And I'll end in this particular slide, and I have about 5 minutes left for questions, I think. So one thing which everybody gets very, and this is something I would love this workshop to discuss, besides looking at just the state of the space industrial base in the US, to look at the state of the space industrial base globally. Who can you partner with? One of the biggest complaints of your partner nations, forget India, is that IATAR is a killer. I was in the UK. I was in a conference with Wilton Park, and one of the biggest complaints was that no one can really partner. So forget India, So how do we get over these hurdles? So if you look at India's partnership strategy, it's very interesting. On one hand, India has signed onto the Artemis Accords, not the program. I think people always collate the two. So basically agreeing to the non-binding principles of the Artemis Accords, which also includes space resource utilization. On the other hand, when India was in the BRICS summit in Johannesburg, when the Chandrayaan-3 landed for the first time for India, I mean, the celebrations were absolutely unbelievable. The nationalism, the pride, whereas when we had the US commercial entity landing with Intuitive Machine, I hardly saw anyone celebrating. Whereas in India, it was like a festival, right? That the lunar program landed. So you can see with international partnership that Prime Minister Modi did at the time was that as the lunar landing was happening, he offered the idea of a BRICS Space Commission, an idea that you can actually collaborate with BRIC nations, that now includes Iran as well, to basically have remote sensing and other partnership. And then also what is interesting is that India also advocates for a South Asia kind of collaboration. And so there are these different interesting partnerships that India leads. And this, I'll end with this. This brings me to my first slide. You see now capability, you saw what they're hoping to achieve. You see that these two countries are absolutely changing the discourse on space. I teach with the African Space Leadership Institute, and my students are from the different African space programs. And they are now talking about how Africa should start thinking about space resource utilization and not really always focus on what traditional space does. So there's a great ambition and desire for that. This is why. The reason is that both China and India, with changing the discourse and how space is thought about, is actually changing the conversation, which is then making its way into the United Nations, who's also getting very serious about actually understanding how we can build norms and treaty-based guidelines of how these resources are going to be shared. So I'm going to end there and a few minutes left for questions, so I'll be happy to take any. I already see a hand up there.
This is a hybrid conference, so we have virtual
Oh, yeah,
attendees. We'd
absolutely.
Like
Mhm.
to come up here so they could see your nice face, Dan.
So I just want to know, and I thought the presentation was great.
Mhm.
I just want to know how the sanctions against China for chips sales is affecting their space program.
I mean, you don't see that the impact as much as we would hope for. So when I think about their development of their capability, let's think about capability, right? Their ability to support their joint, the idea of their joint force, their ability to use space for missile tracking. If you look at the latest punishment drills that they're carrying out, which the whole world is watching, how they are coercing Taiwan for swearing in a democratically elected leader, you do not see an effect of that. You do not see the effect on their ability to go to low Earth orbit. You do not see an effect of that on their ability to build supply chain capability. I haven't seen the effect of it. I might be proven wrong if I dig deeper, but at least what I'm seeing from what they said they're going to do in the last few years, they have actually achieved everything. So I don't see an impact today. And the other thing which is interesting is that they are actually responding to any kind of such sanctions, right? So because they have taken great lessons from Russia. So one is that many countries have actually taken lessons from Russia. One is that they are trying to build their own capability indigenously, and which is China's trajectory for many things you see with quantum, with artificial intelligence, robotics, access to the international market. So you see this, you sanction them or you deny them a particular capability, they build their own. This is why they build their space station and why they are so bullish in space, because they're not allowed to collaborate or have any kinds of collaboration with two entities of the US government. There is a misunderstanding that this is with everyone that is from the US, but it's very clear. They cannot collaborate, I think, with NASA, and they cannot collaborate with the Office of Science and Technology. People think it also includes the DoD. It really doesn't. I might be saying things wrong, but it isn't. So I don't see an impact of that too. So that would be my answer, but I will dig deeper and find out if it's doing.
Dr. Rivera Energy Solutions, how are you today?
I can't see where you are.
Oh,
Oh, there you
oh,
are.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, very good then. Yes, when you made a description of what the scientific efforts are in India,
Yeah.
I had a back to the future moment with the entire effort after post-World War II Japan,
Mhm.
where they used technology and tourism to completely vault themselves to the forefront as an economic power in the world. Do you see perhaps a Marty McFly moment where they say, well, the best stuff comes out of India, happening to you there as well with technology and space tourism?
It seems like there is the start of that narrative. So as I said, when I was doing fieldwork for my book, Scramble for the Skies, even in 2017, that kind of a narrative, India was hesitant. So was China, which is very fascinating. So I did fieldwork in both countries. And so, but today it's a completely changed narrative in both countries. So they do have that particular boldness and ambition. And the younger generation is actually now in leadership of almost all their space startups, including in China. The age group of Chinese space tech, especially space-based startups and companies, is 25 to 40. So there you go. And they feel confident, and they also say that great technologies are going to come up, and we will actually now be able to offer cost-effective solutions to the world, because I'll give you, and I'll end with that, right? So one of the reasons why G60 is establishing an alternate, so-called alternate Starlink, is the fact that Starlink sets are expensive. They take about $600 to set up. I cannot imagine any of my students able to afford it in other countries, and the monthly rate. What China is hoping and what G60 is saying is that they're going to build this technology that's going to offer first of all, scaling up, which brings down the cost, and to be then able to charge maybe less than $100 to $50 per set. So you see that narrative too.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a pleasure. Thanks.
Oh, yeah, thanks. Just to, just connected. Thank you.
Awesome. The theme of our conference is always ensure enduring economic prosperity and national security. And I think from hearing this, our sort of sub-theme is speed and resiliency, and we really have to keep going at that here in the United States, right? But we look forward to international partnerships.